one thing that's been fairly consistent for me throughout my career is the importance of doing something really, really perfect for one consumer as opposed to something really, really average for a lot of consumers. Because I think if you really sweat the details and understand who your kind of alpha consumer is and you do it right for them, everyone else will follow them along. But if you try to go after the mass, by definition you'll come up with ideas and campaigns and products that are not so breakthrough. Start with a very small selection of your consumers that you know can be your flag bearers, I guess, of your brand, the people who are the most passionate about what you're trying to do, and get to know them really, really, really well, like intuitively well. So I think it's about spending a lot of time with consumers and not focus groups, not quantitative studies, just hanging out with them, talking to them, asking what motivates them. Like, ask questions that really have nothing to do with the solution that you're looking for, but will guide you there when you see the answers that they give you. We spent a lot of time in somewhat extraordinary places for people who are middle-aged executives. I mean, I can remember countless times, you know, if I was in London or Tokyo, you know, a big bunch of people who didn't really look like they belonged there would be hanging out in a teenager's nightclub, you know, because you would think, well, why is a sport brand doing that? But it was more, we're trying to understand just how these people are behaving, what's motivating them, why. Like, they're not just a one-dimensional athlete, they have other things going on in their life. So how can you just observe them from afar, participate in their life? Don't sort of try and ask them to answer questions and describe it to you. Instead, just be naturally part of their environment and see what is motivating them. Probably the most important thing is, as marketers, I think inherently you have to be innovation driven. Like, we can never ever rest on our laurels, and I think our story is one of just a supremely amazing brand that a lot of time went by where we just hadn't looked forward and said, where else can we go? And that caught up with us. And so once we took a look at the landscape through a slightly more creative lens, we realized there was so much opportunity. The consumer was yearning for us to do more for them that we just hadn't really done yet. So I think the biggest lesson for me is stay ahead of that. Like, always force yourself to reinvent. Even when you think things are the best they can be, it doesn't mean that they will be a year from now. So you've got to always stay in front of the consumer, stay anticipating their needs and keep changing to meet them. Fostering a culture of innovation is the single most important thing that people in a job like mine can do, because no company is anything without the people that are driving the decisions. It's simple as that. So if your people have a collective mindset of innovation, a lot of the hard work gets done for you. So I think, how do you foster that? A lot of it is about understanding your people, getting to know your people, and seeing the people on your team that have the passion to drive the thinking forward, and putting a lot of time into those people, giving them a voice so that the rest of the culture can form around them. So in a way, it's not that different to how you study and learn consumers. Like, understand within your employee body who can really help to affect the culture in the way you want it to be, and really give them a voice and support them to get there. It's a really interesting question, because to your earlier question of, like, when I joined our company, we inherited a culture that had become a little bit distant from what the brand was about. So we really did have to change the culture pretty dramatically. And so a great example is actually some employees in the team, completely of their own volition, came up with this idea called the movement, which they wanted to launch within Gatorade to encourage people who were not participating in an athletic lifestyle to start participating in one, so that they would learn more about the consumer that we are serving. And that's the kind of idea where, for me personally, I put so much attention into supporting it, because I knew if it came from the bottom up and it caused everybody to get involved in what the brand was about, then the results would pay off. And this year alone, actually, we had every single person in the entire BU set themselves an athletic goal, everybody achieved it, and along the way they all learned and observed the consumer because they were participating in the lifestyle. So that's part of creating the culture. You know, it's a really interesting question because for me, I think, again, this is a mantra that I hold myself to because of the experiences I've had across Virgin, across Nike, and now at Gatorade, is when it comes to communications and advertising, you do your research up front to understand the consumer so that you can use your own judgment to decide whether the copy is right. Going to things like link testing after the fact is not a good way to get good advertising. So I think what we do now is, again, across every aspect of our team, we expect people to sweat their knowledge of the consumer in such a way that when we're looking at advertising together, we're all gravitating to the same thing because we know the consumer so well, we know what they are going to respond to. Yeah, I think there's been friction. I keep coming back to the same theme, I know, but there's friction when there's not a shared common understanding of the consumer. When everyone understands the consumer as deeply as each other, you tend to find that the research people actually, they're not like the CFO saying no, they're actually often the people providing more insight to help sell the campaign into management because they can so clearly articulate why it's the right thing to do. So I think our research folks have become more, we talk a lot about their focus being foresight, not insight, like foresight of what is it going to take to create something that really does break through a new paradigm that cuts through, that gets the consumer engaged. And as long as they have that knowledge base, they become a much bigger supporter in selling in ideas actually than after the fact saying it's right or wrong and here's why. I don't know if this is a appropriate segue, but I think I've learned from seeing it happen too often that research becomes, let's research this so we can see after the fact why it failed. Which is like, really? Well, wouldn't we be better to put our resources into making sure it's going to succeed in the first place? I think really right now with the work we've just done at Gatorade, there's no question, like, because even though we knew as marketers that what we were doing was going to be successful, we had to convince management, we had to convince sales, we had to convince retailers. So that's where the role of the researcher was so important, to be able to help us craft a story of here's how you can project and extrapolate what you expect this is going to do in the marketplace. Obviously, Richard Branson, I was lucky enough to work at Virgin, and I think with him, it was an extraordinary experience to work for someone who just so deeply understands what his brands are about, articulates it in everything he says and does, and then trusts everyone around him to execute upon that vision. And I think I took a lot away from that because if you can just be very pure about what you stand for, it's really easy for people to know how to make decisions because they know what they're lining it up against. And I think that is the power of great brands. Like, brands can do that, people can do that, leaders can do that, but for sure that's something I've carried with me along the way.